Uh, is this okay for the recording, or do you want it closer? Okay, cool. So, quick introduction. I'm Mekin, engineer by education. Most of my early career spent building systems that dealt with large amounts of data, long before it became fashionable to call it big data. Uh, I do look younger than I am, so. Uh, but I think my only qualification to be speaking to you guys about payments is that for about 11 months within Flipkart, I was trying to run a business around payments. We called it Paysipi. And in those about 10, 11 months, I had a massive amount of crunched learning, thanks to colleagues like Farid, but also because I had to rub my nose on bank altars uh, many times. Right. So I think what I learned and would want to keep this mostly conversational. And I think in terms of facts that exist, there are enough facts out there that talk about the payment ecosystem. So that I'd request you to Google your first hit actually gives you enough good data. So this conversation is going to be a lot more about conversation and experiences of how we think things have gone and why things have gone, and we'll keep it conversational. We prefer that you guys participate in this. So with that intro, Farid, can you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mekin. I'm Farid. I've been in the payment industry for a long time, and I'm old and I look it, right? So unlike Mekin, who gets away with looking much younger. But yeah, we did some interesting work at PZP, building out.
Oh, hang on. I think so Farid was part of the first payment switch.
Right.
So he goes back like a long time in terms of where payments started, not just in India. So
right. So okay, all right. Thanks, Mekin. Um, for but it's actually a good thing. So I was part of the team at a company called Verifone, which built the world's first payment gateway. And we had the likes of early Amazon when it was just an ugly black website as our customer, and it's been a number of years in the payment industry. What we haven't seen or have seen a couple of times is some innovation around what happened with 3D Secure and what happened with EMV. But otherwise, payment systems by and large, as we know them, right on the same set of rails that were built, I don't know, 3-4 decades ago, right?
yeah,
So
3.5 decades.
yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah,
So
over to you, Mekin.
I think Farid's modest in his introduction, but he's basically seen most of the journey in payments and has a strong viewpoint and a large experience working with regulatory. So he'll chime in on those. But quickly starting off, right? Why do you think we need payments? Why payments? What does it solve? Why payments? To buy something, yeah, but should just be able to buy for anything to run. Okay, it's like oxygen. No, that's cool. For anything to run, for transactions. Why else? Yeah, you're selling something, you should get paid. But you should get paid. Why do you need payments? So you should just get paid, right? Why does there need to be a mode? So interesting. So I think you guys have touched upon a lot of aspects, making it a global village. Ah, nice. Have you tried paying Indian rupees in other countries? Yes. So there's technology that can enable it, but yeah, I think you're heading in the right direction. Anyone else? Yeah. So I think like some of you said, right? It's almost. Please come. No worries. We have. Hey man, good to see you. What's up? Okay, so the latecomers get to answer while standing. So why do we need payments? Ha, Samir, why do we need payments? Okay, no, that answer is taken. So come up with something new. But frankly, if you need to get paid, you should just get paid, right? Why do you need payments? So you need a medium or you need a mode. But careful. Okay? Uh, but frankly, and this might seem outrageous at the start of the talk, but I think we should move to a world where payments just happen. You don't need payments, right? You have to get paid, you get paid. You don't need anything in between to happen for, and whatever that needs to happen, happens under the hood, right? Like, yes, you need servers, yes, you need connectivity, but when you're using an application or when you're buying something, you don't worry about TCP protocol or IP. Right? But so that's where ideally I would imagine payments to get to. But the reason it hasn't, so why has payments not gotten there? Right? What are the forms of payments that you guys know? Mostly cash, yes. Wallets. Payment gateways, okay. But it's, it's, it is amazing. It is amazing that I still haven't heard cards. Ah, wow. Tax filing. Interesting, right? So I think that's another piece. And maybe, Farid, you want to talk about IOU notes, credit?
Sheep and goats? No?
Huh? Nice. We are getting there. Yeah. So no, I was going to ask uh, Farid. Nobody talked about checks. Nobody collects checks. Ah. Yeah, they're almost obsolete. Why are they not obsolete? Or what is different between checks and mobile wallets? Oh, that's interesting. Check. Okay. You should be waiting for 2 days. So, on a factor called time, checks are very slow, right? Okay. What else? They're more trustworthy. Oh, they are not trustworthy because they can bounce. Okay. Uh,
And also on the factor of time, checks are not trustworthy.
on the
Like most of our vendors will say, can you please swipe your card now before you leave this premises?
Absolutely.
yeah, so check is post, right? So the transaction happens in a whatever. If transaction is T, so T plus N or maybe 3. So they're T plus 3 days when actually the payment happens. So transaction happens now versus payment happening sometime later. But they do give you a lot of ease in terms of this notion of post-dated checks. We don't have a post-dated mobile wallet swipe yet. Huh? We have credit. So I think now we are linking a bunch of things, right? But at the core of payments, there are some very, very simple nuances which we'll come to.
Yeah. So, yeah, great start to this. I think what else is, I think the underlying theme is that payments are the lifeblood for any business that you actually need to run, because that's where, you eventually make money. And when you actually realize the funds, which is called settlement, is something that becomes very important to you as a business, right? As an entrepreneur, you're looking at, how quickly can you actually see money in the account, right? So, the concept of instant settlement, same-day settlement has been around for a while. I think India's done a great job with the IMPS rails. Anybody familiar with the IMPS rails? That allows for an instant settlement. But if you go back and see on the popular payment modes, which we like to call, there's still a lot of delay between when the actual transaction happens to when funds hit your account. Just wanted to talk a little bit about that. And there are a few things that you also use payment instruments for, right? One is to guarantee some services, and typically you do that through an authorization, right? So an authorization is an intent from your side to actually make the transaction happen, and get your goods or services, right? For that authorization to be captured and actually become a financial transaction and actually settle, like it takes a bit of time, right? So let's talk about what I think the industry is going towards a little bit, and what challenges and opportunities exist in that space.
So actually, before that, right, quick question to all of you. What value does a mobile wallet add? I mean, why are mobile wallets the rage? Convenience. You don't have to fight for chiller. Okay, so we have ease, right, as one of the other parameters. And you think, why are mobile wallets more convenient? Non-regulated. Very, very big word.
They're actually regulated.
They are regulated, but
Compared to the regular payment modes, it's ease of regulation that allows us to. For example, there's no two-factor authentication.
Exactly.
Mobile wallet.
so they're not abiding by two-factor authentication.
That's actually one of the reasons why wallets are popular.
So, in some sense, I think very brilliantly put, the short answer for the existence of mobile wallet is that that the other online modes had to do two-factor authentication, that they were bound by which bunch of actually, like, I don't know how many of you have an Apple TV or use payments on Google Play, and they still don't do 2FA, right? But if everything else had to go through a 2FA or a two-factor authentication, the reason mobile wallets came in was that they weren't going through a two-factor authentication. Any other reason that you would want mobile wallets? Why are they inferior? What is the...
Okay.
Come to that,
Yeah.
yes. So VC money. Huh? Sorry, couldn't understand. So it's
One-click
Yeah,
type of
so
transaction.
no 2FA, and basically, so very high on ease, which is what made them. But why did it have to be? Why could other payments not become easier?
Because you have it in your mobile, so that particular one factor is already in your hand. Security again is no, but security is it is in mobile.
No,
If there's a shady side, I don't want to put my credit card there. I might put $1,000 in a wallet and then use the wallet to pay that.
sure.
So exposure, I think, is a key aspect,
Yeah.
right? So you don't want to expose your life savings on the shady sites that you go to. Yeah.
But interestingly, that security is also something that credit cards have thrived on. Right? That when you swipe a credit card payment or a credit card payment happens, the fact that you can contest that, right, is not something that is provided by most other instruments. Right? That you've given a check, it's like contesting that, no, that's not my signature. Try it with a bank.
Right. So that's a great point, and that is referred to in the payment circles as non-repudiation. So essentially, proving that I did the transaction and not somebody else is an important part of a payment life cycle, right? So, and that's the reason authentication exists, right? Today, to prove that you authenticated this transaction and thereby you did this transaction based on what you know and what you have, right? Which are the two factors.
Okay, so how long do you think mobile wallets would exist? Or why would they exist? Actually, nobody told me about the downside of having a mobile wallet. Limited. That is regulatory, so limited, 10,000 rupees. What else? Security. Why do you think they are less secure?
If they have my PIN number or something to access my mobile, they can do it.
So basically, 2FA is adding security. They are without security. It's one more account to manage, okay?
Okay, great point.
So I think what this man just said, right, is a very, very important point. And I hinted to you when I asked you that, have you tried buying anything with Indian rupees in another country? Right? What he said is interoperability. Mobile wallets do not interoperate. So a Paytm has to work hard to get as an acceptance on various websites and various offline channels. Because if the receiver is not willing to take my money, right, like, as in go try shopping with potatoes as a currency. Right, so I think that is the challenge, that if you, and this notion of somebody willing to accept your currency, right, willing to acquire your money, is a very, very important piece.
True. And payments by very nature is a two-sided network, right? So you need a bunch of people who are willing to pay using a particular method, and you need a bunch of people who are willing to receive that using that method, right? So building a two-sided network is a challenging task, and the lack of interoperability in wallets, while it has been promised several times, may or may not happen. Not sure. But that itself creates this islands of multiple wallets. So you use a bunch, Paytm for 3 transactions on 3 merchants. You use Freecharge for your recharges and stuff like that, right? So
So what's different between a wallet and your bank account?
Someone else is getting interest from my wallet.
Fantastic. Right? So why do you keep money on your wallet?
I mean, I let someone get whatever I'm losing it. I'm not losing anything, and I'm going to.
You're losing the interest. Sorry? Yeah.
That's very
Ah.
eager. I mean, usually it's like for me to make it a
Yeah.
limits for it.
Yeah.
The merchant who is having.
Yeah. Right. So I think we now touched upon a lot of negatives of a mobile wallet, right? So and back to Fareed's point, operability or network, right? Which is the biggest network that you know of?
payments.
Huh? PayPal. Okay. Visa and Master. Nice. US dollars. Is
No, in India it's NPCI
NPCI for
for sure. For example, IMPS is one of
the biggest network?
in India.
Huh? But yeah, it is cash. The biggest network of payments is cash, right? There are enough givers, there are enough takers.
Absolutely.
That is what makes cash the biggest network. And what Fareed talked about, that if there aren't enough givers, takers don't have value. If there aren't enough takers, givers don't have value. So the instrument loses value the moment the network doesn't exist, right? Which is why like potatoes as a currency is not a good idea. But cash works brilliantly. So this invention of cash made transactions go through the roof. Right? So next to cash, it's Visa and Master, right?
Actually, China UnionPay.
Now China UnionPay. Yeah. So why don't you talk about
Right.
the size of that network and how did they come to be?
Right. So again, Visa and Mastercard have been around for a long time, as has American Express. American Express is a slightly different story. It's a closed ecosystem in terms of the fact that they directly work with the merchants, set up merchant accounts for them, and they issue the cards as well. So it's a kind of what we call as an honest transaction for American Express cards. But Visa, Mastercard have actually, they're made of member banks, and they give banks the ability to acquire merchants, and these banks are called acquirers, and they give certain banks the ability to issue cards, payment cards, and they're called issuers, right? So I can actually do a transaction using an HDFC card at an ICICI point of sale device, and my transaction would get honored because ICICI would route the transaction through the Visa network to HDFC for the transaction to get authorized, right? So it's an offers transaction in this case, and this is one of the big reasons why the spread of Visa and Mastercard has been so big. China UnionPay started off to service China, just like RuPay has started off in India, but they've worked out a lot of deals globally to ride on other people's networks to be able to create acceptance of their payment instrument, which is the CUP card, across the globe, right? So, and they've grown pretty significantly, and the biggest thing in their favor is obviously the population in China. Most people have a card, and they issue CUP cards for both credit and debit.
So how many of you are familiar with the terms issuer, acquirer, that's it? 3. Okay. So let's quickly walk through a basic. Right. So you have a user, you have a merchant. user has a payment instrument that has been issued to the user, and in Farid's example, that was like a what, HDFC card,
Yeah.
right? And merchant has a POS device, which is again issued by typically a bank or a payment solution provider, which is connected to the rails of another bank. So, okay, I'll do the non-tech version of the transaction, and then Farid can add the tech version of the transaction. So what's basically happening is that users tries to pay to the acquirer, to the merchant, right? Merchant has an acquiring bank associated that, okay, my acquiring bank, ICICI, can you please check if I can take this payment? So what should happen then? Like, what can ICICI do to ensure that this payment is legitimate? That what are you checking for when you're trying to pay a merchant? What is the merchant really checking for? Balance in your account. Will this check bounce, or will this payment instrument bounce or not? It should not bounce, right? And it's a real-time transaction. In real time, you're trying to figure out that will this bounce or not. So that's one. What else? Fraud authentication. So try and authorize, right? That is this the same person who owns this, and which is where notions of whether it is your chip and pin or 3D secure come in play, regardless of the model. So how will the acquiring bank know is this the real user or not? Can the acquiring bank know that does this person have money in their account or not? They can't, right? The only person who can know that is the issuing bank. Right? So the acquiring bank then transfers the query to the issuing bank. And the issuing bank then figures out that, yes, this is a card that I have issued. I know this person. So one, I know this person. I have issued this card, and there is enough balance or there is enough credit, so you can process this transaction. So that's the non-tech version. Farid.
So whether it's a e-commerce transaction that you do on a website, or a point of sale transaction at a merchant, or an ATM transaction even. ATM transactions are slightly different, I'll talk about that, but the concept is the same, right? So you can walk into any ATM or merchant who's got a point of sale device that accepts a Visa card, for example, and swipe your card there for whatever goods or services that you purchased. The transaction actually makes its way to the acquirer, which is the merchant's bank, through to their payment switch, right? So they have an acquiring switch on their side. The switch is nothing but a piece of software that receives your transaction, and typically transactions are formatted in a format called ISO 8583 or some variant of that. And this transaction is then looked at to determine where this transaction should be sent to, which is the bank, right? And that typically is determined by the first 6 digits of your card. That's called the BIN. And the transaction then gets, if it's the same bank that has issued the card, then it becomes an honest transaction. It goes to their card management system or core banking system and authorizes the transaction, right? If it's a different bank, then typically transactions ride over the Visa network, assuming that this is the Visa example, and reaches the issuing bank. The issuing bank switch receives the transaction, decodes it, checks for the authorization. Before that, it checks that whether the transaction has been authenticated. Let's say it's an e-commerce transaction. It checks for something called CAVV, XID, and stuff like that. I think this is probably too high level to get into the details on that. But it checks for a bunch of things that proves that this transaction was authenticated, and then does an authorization request to the card management system or the core banking system to figure out if the customer has sufficient funds. If they do, there is a hold placed on the fund amount of the transaction, and an authorization response, which is typically carried in a field 39 of 00, is sent back to the merchant POS, right? And the charge slip is printed and the transaction is completed. So again, it traces the same route back using the card networks to the acquiring bank and to the merchant device.
So which of this part do you think is the most difficult? In all of this, in all these steps that happen, which do you think is the most challenging part, or where the acquirer to the issuer? Okay. So let me maybe ask a orthogonal question, which will link very directly. What is the maximum payment gateway fees that any of you have paid? Huh? Yeah. we'll come to it, but what? So no practical direct question, man. Simple answer. So 2%. That's too low, man. 4.5, 5%. Anybody who's paid more than that? Okay, used to pay 4.5, 5%, but now has come down to. I have heard of 10% being charged, right? So payment gateway is charging for 10%, primarily because you are not trustworthy enough. Back in 2009, actually 2008, I wasn't yet part of Flipkart. Sachin and Binny were trying hard to get a payment gateway to approve them, and payment gateway wanted 3 years bank statement, which obviously for a startup which is 1 year old doesn't exist. Why do you think the payment gateway wanted that? It's unsecured lending, but I think primarily in this, and we'll come to where payment ecosystem is moving and where it was. But the largest challenge was that from a technology point of view, being able to understand and figure out how risky a transaction is, payment gateways had very little capability, right? How many of you now operate on an InstaMojo or a similar solution? Yeah, right. So how easy is it to get a payment gateway now? Self-serve, right? It's self-serve now, right? So what's happened in these, whatever, 8 years? Has competition, 2FA. Okay, so but 2FA in some sense existed as a concept even then.
And now a lot of users have also increased.
Users have increased, so it's become big business. That is right.
That is one of the main.
Yes. Yeah. So it's now seen as big business, but what has happened as a result? Competition has happened, but you which regulation opened up?
Like you can do without eKYC and up till 10 or with up till
Which existed even then.
I think the systems
Yeah.
have matured over this time.
How did the systems mature?
Amounts of data that you're collecting over
So data. I think the core was basically what you said, that now this is seen as large enough business. Enough people have now invested in it and then gone about solving that problem and realized that in this whole ecosystem, these giants called banks, right? They have unfortunately not moved fast enough on most of these, which is what has led to a lot of other folks, whether it is Payzippy, or whether it was Payzippy or a bunch of others, who have gone about creating and figuring out much faster, much easier ways in which you can solve this problem using technology. Right? And that's the difference between then and now, that there hasn't been actually any opening up of regulation.
Not particularly. So it's more of a maturing of the ecosystem overall, but essentially capabilities that have been created by companies like what we did at Payzippy to your new generation payment gateways. Hi.
Come in,
Come.
come in.
To kind of going back to basics, right? Being a two-sided network, now you trust the merchant more because you've got enough data and you're able to onboard the merchant much faster. You have sufficient capabilities based on data and past transactions to determine if a particular transaction has a probability of fraud, and therefore you are able to now make a more educated decision on whether you authorize this transaction or not. So it's come back to the kind of data that has been built up over time. It's come back to the kind of systems that have been built up over time, and the fact that there is a larger trust that has come in overall into the ecosystem, and that's kind of the whole COD thing, right? When we did this COD,
Cost.
there was this whole customer exercise that we did, right?
Yeah.
Bringing in
Yeah, yeah.
customers, and we asked customers why is it that they use cash on delivery, and way back when, I think when we first started,
Yeah.
it was about trust. They wanted to make sure they got the iPhone and not the brick, right? But a year later, 12 months later, they came back and said that, we had this session again with them, and they came back and said that, hey, it's more convenient. It's one click. I don't need to rummage through my wallet, enter my card details.
16-digit card
Yeah,
details,
right?
CVV
So
number,
it's
and then
come
a 3D secure.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
it became a question of ease because now the trust angle had been solved to a large extent. The e-commerce companies obviously gathered a lot of steam. They proved the trust by delivering quality, genuine products, right? So it's a maturing of the overall ecosystem that has happened. Today, when I ask, why do people still use cash on delivery? It's again still a combination of ease of use, and at some level there is, lack of education as we expand into tier 2, tier 3, 4 cities. The association of their payment instrument is with the ability to withdraw cash from an ATM and not the fact that you can actually use it for a transaction. So there is a slight angle to it.
The cash on delivery. Yeah,
But that's not a problem we are trying to solve, right? So
so fair enough. I think it's hard to document how much of it is because of trust versus ease. And obviously, if we are interviewing somebody, he's not going to say that, hey, boss, I
actually did that. So one of my friends owns my neighborhood mobile store, and I had to, fix a screen guard. And at the same time, big guy, 6 feet, well built, comes in and orders for like 5 phones and pays by cash. And I'm like, sir, why are you paying by cash? He says, no, I don't want a bill. I don't want any record of this. And that happens, right? So that is a reality that we
live in.
I think the government is also doing a lot of things to make things better. We're probably not going to solve for this big guy who still wants to pay cash, but we're going to be able to solve for the merchant who today is not willing to accept or is not too keen on a card payment, because suddenly you ding him an additional 2.5, 3% on the transaction with wafer thin margins today, the mobile, especially in mobiles. It becomes kind of detrimental to his business model. So, and I think the current government is doing a great job in trying to incentivize, what is happening and increase digital transactions.
So, question to all of you, right? Is this equation familiar to you? Trust versus ease. Do you intuitively relate to it that something's high trust might be low ease, and because of security or safety, you are willing to compromise on convenience and ease? What are the use cases you can think of where for trust you are bank locker, okay? Okay, versus security or trust. In what way?
So if you're taking a home loan, the amount of effort that you have to put in is a lot. So you got to give them a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
The amount of scrutiny that it goes through is significant. You
So
have to run it against a credit bureau.
fair.
Right?
Can you
Taking an unsecured loan,
yeah?
much simpler.
Can you think of any non-payment case?
Even from a service provider side, whenever you implicitly or explicitly force trust in your customers,
Yeah.
to make it easier for them.
Yes. But can you think of non-payment areas where trust and ease come to play? Anybody?
ID, it's again about payment.
Well, airport security. So, in general, all forms of security, right? Whether it is hotel security or airport security, what you're trying to build is more trust. That hey, because this place is more secure, and that's the only reason you are willing to tolerate the inconvenience, right? The good part that I think cash on delivery did is it set a benchmark for ease. That this is the level of ease that people expect, that your consumers expect. Now, all other payment methods need to beat that benchmark. That how can you make it as easy or easier than cash? And like some of the payment methods beat it by like you don't have to now think of change because cash on delivery still does have that problem. But this equation, trust versus ease, and then I added a little one there, which is cost, right? And we haven't yet talked a lot about cost of transaction. Do you want to take a guess on what is the cost of cash or a check transaction? How many of you know what's the cost of a check transaction? Huh? $20. 2 to 3%. Okay. Anyone else? 2 to 3% of the transaction value.
You mean cost to the bank or cost?
Total cost to humanity for a check transaction. Yeah, matlab it's why should we support check or cash for that matter or card?
Check is the highest because it involves a lot of employees.
How much? How much? Huh?
So because the bank, they have to accept it, then they have to scan the check again.
Yeah.
Even with CTS and all that, check truncation services.
The CTS clearing has to approve, same
So,
process as the
Between check and cash, which do you think is higher? Cash is higher, okay. Check is higher. Check is higher, cash is higher.
Yeah, I think it's about 300 to 400
Yeah.
bucks.
Yeah. So check is fairly high. Cash, if you actually try and answer the humanity question, or if you even try and answer the India question, the cost of cash is actually fairly high at a printing, managing, all of it, right? So if you could actually do transactions without cash, I think the savings you would have are actually significant. So if you were to, as in the challenge is that we don't know the size of the black money economy, so it's hard to get the percentage savings.
True.
But of the white economy, cash is actually a significant cost. I think it comes to about 5 bips or something like that in terms of cost.
Right. Especially with counterfeiting and
Yeah.
theft that happens.
Because banks don't have to, because merchants need it. Because you live in a regulated environment where the regulator demands that only the banks are allowed to do A, B, C, D, E, F. Yeah, but I think it
So it's actually a very good point.
Yeah.
I think I'll just kind of add
Yeah,
to that. I think the fact that transactional data allows banks to do a lot more in terms of a deeper relationship with the customer is just being, I think people are waking up to that fact. The fact that, somebody starting out in life, and we are a country of a huge number of millennials, probably doesn't have a huge credit bureau record, or in fact they have a very thin or non-file. And if I'm able to use as a bank transactional data of such customers, even on their debit card or on their savings account, I will actually be in a better position to offer them a larger portfolio. I think banks are waking up to that, but that's the opportunity that exists also today in the fintech space. And I think I know of at least 10 startups in that
Yeah.
lending space right
So Samir, simple answer to your question is that banks get very heavily regulated. Right? You're dealing with people's money, so the amount of trust that you have in a bank, it's near impossible for anyone else to build that, and that is because there is the reason Lehman Brothers going down was such a big event is because it was a bank that was going down. You don't expect a bank to go down, right? Bank is supposed to be a very safe, secure place, and it is that way because the government, the regulatory environment has ensured that it goes through enough. Like dealing with bank people, okay, we are getting recorded, right? So I won't use Hindi. Huh?
Correct. Correct.
Yes. 10. Sorry, I didn't understand. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And whose margin are 10%, boss? Matlab
Yeah.
let him finish. Hang on.
Yeah. Absolutely. No,
And I think that's starting to happen now, right? The interesting piece, and good we are talking about cost, because what's the cost of an IMPS transaction? Huh? 6 rupees, no. Only SBI charges for IMPS. No, it's not a trick question. It's if you think about from a Rails point of view and how IMPS operates, it's near zero, right? It's like compared to, as in the card transactions and IMPS transactions don't compare in cost, right? The reason card companies should be very, very worried, and they are, is because their networks, the network I'd drawn and I've now erased, you used to 1.5 to 2% at least. That's going to the network, right? In terms of processing of a transaction.
So there's at least 14 basis points that they collect on every transaction, regardless of who the acquirer or the issuer is, and it can only go up depending on whether it's an international transaction,
Visa
what
and
kind of
Master.
merchant category code that is being serviced. In fact, I was at day yesterday. And they are worried. They're worried about the new set of rails that IMPS provides and the kind of experience that hopefully will evolve over the next few months to make UPI, really slick. And I think a couple of companies have done a fantastic job on wrapping UPI up very well and launching it as a payment method. So so yeah, so there is definitely a cost to transactions. Right. True, and the issuer takes the lion's share here because they're actually, taking a risk on the funds, as
Yeah.
they would call it, right? But it's not such a big risk, and it's kind of
And data is fast solving that risk, except that the banks, like I said, are very slow moving in terms of assessing this risk reward ratio, that how much transactions can I get versus how much risk. And while we are on that point, I would want to state at least my opinion that I think our regulators, in some way you can look at it as that Indian regulator has been very, very conservative, and they've been actually extremely conservative even on the payment side. I think it's good that because Indian regulators have been conservative, the 2008 downturn didn't impact us much and so on. On this side, my opinion was that, hey, regulations coming in slightly later, or between trust and ease, ease getting slightly easier, and then trust coming in, might have let this ecosystem develop faster. That said, now that we are on such solid ground, that now nobody talks about fraud. When was the last time you heard about credit card fraud or payment fraud, right? Because in a lot of countries, that is actually a large issue, right? They deal with it as cost of doing business, right? That anywhere between almost 0.5% to sometimes higher in very, very payment promiscuous countries.
it's pretty huge.
Is massive, right? But they deal with it because it's like, hey, it allows for multiple amount of scaling because it makes ease much higher. So between ease and trust, our regulators have focused a lot more on trust, and it is on the ecosystem to develop ease, right? And it's, in some ways, it reflects poorly on our entrepreneurs that it took UPI to actually enable ease. It's also, to be fair to the entrepreneurs, working with banks like UPI and IMPS have done is far harder. And that's a different capability.
Yeah. So actually, I'd like to add a couple of things to that. Let me spend like 30 seconds on fraud. So I think there was a recent report that came out where the cost of false positives today, where I'm actually marking a transaction as fraud, is higher than the cost of actual fraud itself. And that is a risk that I think as entrepreneurs, when we build fraud management systems, we need to be careful about it. It's not about running a set of rules and applying it across transactions. You need to think deeper in terms of, and I think this is a HasGeek conference, so I can talk a little bit about the technology. You need to get into clustering, you need to get into outlier detection, you need to get into a lot of serious stuff rather than applying a set of rules on a bunch of transactions. That is 1980s, right? So I think we need to be much more mature than that. So our false positives, where you don't end up losing a customer because you've actually insulted him by calling him fraudulent, right? You go ahead and you block his account, and he's actually a legit customer. He's actually trying to do a legit transaction. So those of you who are trying to build fintech around fraud management, that's something that I'd caution you on. What were we talking about?
So no, how many of you have heard of AEPS? What is AEPS? Wow. Yeah, Aadhaar enabled payment systems. What is that? No, good. It's good that you know everything. At least someone's answering. But what is AEPS? Okay, so given only two of you had heard of it.
Probably I can share.
Yeah.
So Aadhaar enabled payment system is one of the most unique payment systems in the world, where you can actually send money to an Aadhaar number. So it doesn't require you to basically have an account number or an IFSC code. It's already mapped. And for those people, Aadhaar doesn't really know when you're sending the money that who is it going to or how much money is being transferred. And this is a system that's developed by UIDAI and NPCI. And just to share what is the effect of this, you all might have heard about direct beneficiary transfer that the government is trying to do, right?
Janadhan.
The Jan Dhan Yojana. So it's estimated just with 15% of subsidies that are being directly, transferred from the central government, we've already saved 15,000 crores in just 1 year. And this is and what is it doing today? Earlier, if a payment had to go to a person, let's say somebody who's getting central government pension, it would go from the central government to the state government, to the treasury, to the district, then municipality, then the Gram Panchayat, and then you would go and withdraw this. So today what is happening is it skips all of these steps and directly the money gets transferred to the beneficiary, right? So this is what Aadhaar Enabled Payments Bridge does. Actually I've been working on this for some time. I just wanted to share this. Just yesterday, I think NPCI came out with a number. I think in the last 2 months alone, there were 1 billion transactions that went through AEPS.
Yeah.
We're
So
talking about billion transactions. So it's not just the government sending money. So I was in Rajasthan yesterday. In Rajasthan, they have a service called eMitra.
Yeah.
And, if you are a eMitra holder, you need to, it's basically a kiosk which offers government services. There are private entrepreneurs who become eMitra providers. So if you are in a village and let's say you don't have any access to a bank or internet, you just walk into an eMitra kiosk and you want to send money to your sister who's, let's say, 100 kilometers away in a remote village, but you know her Aadhaar number, you just go to an eMitra kiosk, tell that this is the Aadhaar number I want to send the money to, and you give your authorization and the money gets debited, the money gets credited. And this infrastructure doesn't exist anywhere in the world.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. Electronic benefits transfer is huge, right? It's I don't know the ratio vis-a-vis retail payments, but it's significant at a national level, and basically is a contributor to the overall well-being of the country in terms of GDP and in terms of overall health of the country.
I think what this excites me most, what about this excites me most, is that now a very, very large population of India now has accounts, right? That now has accounts, and hence this dream of financial inclusion that they can transact on formal systems become possible. So that now imagine somebody who's gotten 300 rupees through AEPS and now can transact through whatever, IMPS or a UPI mechanism with anybody, right? With any merchant or with government. Right? The possibilities that opens up. And for me, that's actually the larger revolution in the payment space compared to what a lot of us entrepreneurs are driving. A lot of us entrepreneurs are trying to take away what the challenges with cash on delivery, the challenges with check, the challenges with cards, and making all of that easier, right? But this massive space, which today is, as in for us, it's we don't even see it, right? We're mostly blind to it. That economy getting digitized, that economy getting formalized, has massive, massive opportunities in terms of how you can do this. And just to highlight, the savings were because of basically corruption going away. That what digitization does, the reason that guy wants to pay only in cash is he doesn't want a digital record. What digitization does is it makes things transparent, and corruption goes away very, very quickly. Because earlier, somebody would sign for, hey, I've paid this money to these 10 people and pocket most of the money or give them 1/10 of the money, and that's fine. Now that's not possible. As in, I'm sure there'll be corruption in terms of how people deal with these accounts now. There'll be probably agents who deal with these accounts and so on. But this digitization and combined with very easy to use mobile phones make a whole lot possible, which today I don't see actually enough entrepreneurs thinking about. All right. So with that, I want to actually open up, I think this last piece of our talk, which is from and to, if you had to do payments, what are examples of payments that come in each box? So what's a good example of person-to-person payment? Cash is the medium. What's the use case? When do you have to do a person-to-person payment? You borrow, okay? That's good. Huh? Services. Why is a person providing you a service? Huh? Gifting. Okay.
If you take some services,
But
to a salon, you get your service.
but is that a salon is a business or a person?
So, but a lot of them are in the.
Yeah. So a lot of them are in the informal sector, right? The beauty with. Go ahead. Go ahead. Splitting bills. No, I think that's a good that's a good reason for person-to-person payments. Family transfer. So remittance, right? Do you guys have any idea what's the size of remittance? Both global to India and then within India.
It's around 40% of balance of payments.
40% of balance of payments.
That's huge. But
Yeah.
that's like
So I don't remember the number. I don't know if Farid, you remember the number, but
I can give some numbers. So currently in India, we're doing 16,000 crores of transactions every month in debit cards, 24,000 crores a month using credit cards, whereas IMPS alone, which is just 5 years old, is doing 22,000 crores and per month. So it is expected to reach around 40,000 crores by March.
yeah.
2027.
But IMPS does all three, and does both of these, person to business also.
Remittance,
But a remittance is a large part of it, right? And then
only a remittance.
international to India remittance is a large part,
It's huge,
and I think it's unfortunate. In my mind, the people that should have actually won payments in India were probably the telecom guys. They had the biggest lead. They had all the customers lined up. There were customers who were paying them money. They actually solved for charging people for useless services, right? The screensaver, and then. But unfortunately, they just couldn't get out of this high margin, low volume business to get into a high volume, low margin business, right? Had they thought of getting into high volume, low margin, they could have been, as in none of these mobile wallets or none of these would have had any chance against the reach of a lot of these guys. And along with that, if you get interoperability, they would have been the payment kings of the country, right? And it's not that it's not been done. Right? There are examples in Africa where they are the payment kings.
Safaricom and M-Pesa. And
Yeah. So yes,
they started, but they not.
all of them tried, right? So okay, question, right? And I think this is important. As if you're focusing on payments, why do you think they didn't work?
They don't want to take more risk, or they don't want to keep their feet in something.
Okay, they don't want to take more risk. Okay, what else? They never converted to cash, but they had the muscle. If they could have just partnered with a bank and created open accounts. They should have, but okay, fine. They didn't have the foresight. But it's surprising that hey, in 15 minutes of conversation, we are able to come up with things that. So my opinion, right, and with all disclaimers. Whatever was in it for. So I think all of this points to one piece, which is somewhat short-sightedness and like focus on high margin business and getting stuck with that. And then, but to me, they actually had large teams attacking this, right? And I think what they didn't get or what they don't get is ease of use and customer focus, right? That
Yeah.
Network. They had like a ton of people selling SIM cards, and they always thought of them as the last man.
yeah,
They
yeah.
never really
Not the people.
wanted to eliminate that particular layer.
Yes,
They
yes.
wanted to include them, and so everything if you look at it is cash in, cash out points.
Yeah.
So their thinking really stopped at that point.
Exactly, except that you didn't think of the customer as the customer. So they didn't focus on the customer. I think in my mind, that's the only difference between them and say a Flipkart or a Paytm or a PhonePe and Freecharge and all of these, that, hey, these guys focused a lot on this last end customer and figured out that, okay, how do I make it easy? Like Airtel Money transactions, I don't know how many of you have tried them, right? Oh, painful. And it's embarrassing for a telecom company to have created that kind of a transaction.
So one insight of working with telcos and banks was that in the last 2-3 years is when actually mobile banking took off. earlier, even for a telco to be involved in the banking, you didn't have great user experience because, this whole smartphones that happened in the last 3-4 years was what led to the wallets and, all of these fintechs. So if you were to be a telco 4 or 5 years back, you were essentially having 2 or 3
USSD.
channels. You
Yeah.
had USSD, you had SMS, and ultimately what ended up happening was the telcos started becoming service providers to the bank. It was never that the telcos were never in this game. There was banking which was happening, there was IVR banking which was happening, but what they slept over is the last 2-3 years when actually the mobile started taking off, the smartphones started taking off, and then they catch, like Freecharge and others, they started catching up with those guys, as in Airtel Money and Vodafone M-Pesa. So that's my opinion.
No, I think
Ease of use.
actually P2P currency, mobile currency exchange was a fairly common way
Yeah, yeah. And it's unfortunate that they couldn't piggyback on it, see that trend, and say that, hey, no, I'm not even going to stand at the 10,000. Like, even at the 10,000 limit, they were not doing enough. But they could have actually, they had the muscle to blow that 10,000 unit away. They had the KYC. Yeah. I think in my opinion, the fact that they cheated enough with the screensavers and ringtones made it far harder for regulators like a TRAI or an RBI to trust these guys to do a bank's job, right? You need, like, a bank stands for that solid trust, and then trusting these guys to do a bank's job was just hard, which is why, like, try and force that, no, boss, you get another KYC.
There's another.
So we should talk about banks technology then first, maybe.
Yeah. So let's. I think less said about it, the better. But there is still a lot of legacy systems that are out there. There's still a lot of dependence on vendors to make things happen for them. There's still a lot of, I think, lack of control even because of the way technology in the fintech world as a technology provider, grew over time.
So actually a good
Very
example.
expensive proposition for the
No, a
bank.
good example of that is how many of you know how net banking came about? Which other countries do you know of that have a lot of net banking? Does net banking exist in other countries? Net banking as a payment method. Net banking obviously exists, where you are banking with your. But net banking as a payment method, why did it become so popular in India? And how did it become so popular in India?
So yeah, I think there was the relationship with the bank in terms of the fact that a customer had a debit card, issued for them, was not initially enabled for electronic use. I think that itself was a big, hurdle. The fact that customers did not relate their debit card to the ability to transact online or offline in terms of point of sale devices, was still very nascent, right? So that's one instance of why net banking really, happened.
Yeah, but from a technology point of view, net banking was in its barest form exposing a user interface that was meant to be like an admin console for very small usage to the users, because people realized that they had no other forms of driving payments. And very quickly, net banking actually became a fairly large part of payment systems.
Actually equal to debit card share
Yeah,
in
right.
terms
So,
of online.
so that in my mind is a good reflection of when you think banks and technology. That's what it is. And like Farid said, it's a lot because it's 35-year-old legacy system. Patching it is very hard. I don't know how many of you have dealt with patching 5-year-old legacy systems. Imagine 35-year-old. You have to give it to them that these are amongst the most robust systems, right? That both from a speed and accuracy point of view, these are great systems. They have scaled so far brilliantly. As Nandan says that the tsunami that's coming, these systems are not going to last. And it's very, very hard for them because these systems were built by people who are no longer there. 35 years is a long time, or 30 years is a long time. So re-architecting them for higher scale or newer use cases is really, really hard for them.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's
let's quickly try and fill this up,
Matrix.
and I think the reason to fill this up is most often payment entrepreneurs don't necessarily think about all the opportunities that exist in the system. The fact that very few people knew about remittance or the size of remittance, I think it's important to just quickly
Right.
get
And
why
as you
does
fill this up? I think you should probably keep this in the back of your mind, saying thinking cash is your enemy, right? So as you build payment systems, you have to go after the 95% of the people who still use cash to transact. I think the current ecosystem, people are fighting over the same 5%, and nobody's really thought about doing more on the 95% that is not yet on the digital.
So how do you get Jan Dhan
transaction
accounts to pay you, right?
Exactly.
Or how do you get AEPS deeply integrated that the people who get used to those forms of transaction, right? And again, focusing a lot more on that customer. And the reason a telco didn't win or a bank is now at risk is their focus on customer and ease. And if technology is what you bring in, I think along with technology, focusing a lot on ease while keeping trust and security, which thankfully the regulator has done enough for you guys or us, that we don't have to worry so much about trust and security because the regulator mandates it. If we can beat the ease benchmarks, this would be awesome.
In fact,
Right.
there are some good examples I'd just like to state. Right, for example, does everybody know what an APMC is? That's where farmers go and sell their produce and people buy them. There have been pilots that have run, I think, in the last 5-7 years, where payments can be accepted electronically and they're remitted directly to the farmer's account. And if the farmer doesn't have an account, they'll open it for them. And this has actually created a huge benefit to the farmer, who now has a deeper relationship with their bank. And typically today that's a cooperative bank. And now he can actually go ahead and ask for the tractor loan, which the bank was not very keen on giving it to him, because when they saw his book, there really didn't seem to be a lot of transactions there, because he was taking cash, he was paying a commission agent cash, and he used to sometimes overpay, sometimes not get the money on time, right? So these are the opportunities I think that fintech should also try and solve. I think it's good to look at the cream and solve for ease and use cases that currently are still painful from a cash point of view. But I think we need to think a little bit more holistically and inclusively to really go after the remaining 95% of customers who still use cash.
Yeah, so I don't know this column really well, which is why does the government pay itself, or when does the government pay itself? I'm sure there are inter-ministry transfers and there are funds that.
Flood relief.
Yeah, center to state. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. So flow of funds.
Yeah.
Fund disbursement is actually a good example. But I believe this matrix, right, can be very rich. And when you're thinking of payments from an ecosystem point of view, it's good to think of that. Hey, these are all the kinds of payments, and it's good to look at the size of each one of these from your addressable market point of view to go after these. Okay, I have overshot time, and
So I'm just going to wrap up my little piece in 20 seconds. I think there are significant opportunities in the payment space. B2B payments is big as well, and it's not been fully covered very well. There are some very good set of rails that are available in the country, and if you're able to make these payments easy, tie them to invoicing, tie them to TDS, you could actually have a very slick B2B opportunity. There is also a huge opportunity in terms of inward and outward remittances to and from the country. Typically that's an expensive proposition, costs about $20. And for somebody, giving $100 to, a poor relative or whatever back in the country, that's a huge cost, right? They can utilize that $20. So if you can try and solve for that, because that typically today rides on what is called the SWIFT network. If you can figure out ways and means on solving for that, maybe ride on different set of rails. At the end of the day, bring the money to the beneficiary. I think that's going to be a huge opportunity. And P2P in itself has not really taken off, although P2P in terms of cash is huge in India, right? People borrow money from people all the time, pay them back, and it happens all the time. But P2P electronically has not happened a lot, and that's probably because there's not a lot of being a two-sided network, not a lot of outlets that people can spend on. But if you can create easy acceptance points for payment methods, then P2P electronically also starts making sense. With that, I'd like to, I think, conclude on my side as well.
Yeah, I think another large movement that's happening in India, at least right now, that I see is because our economy has been very highly regulated and very conservative, and in the gloomy global system, we are now starting to realize that there is a lot of potential, that we are far too under-leveraged in terms of the goodness that businesses have or that businesses are creating or people have. India is far too under-leveraged, and the result of that is the credit boom. Right, so you would hear a lot of people talking about it. The number of startups in the credit giving space have shot up. A bunch of IPOs that happened recently, like Ujjivan and Equitas, which were like oversubscribed 20 times plus, are in the credit space. So, and there are multiple forms of credit, right? Whether it is credit for school fees or credit for or EMIs and so on. The opportunity in that space, at least over the next 10 years, is massive. I hope that we don't screw it up to become way too over-leveraged and then crash. But in terms of creating leverage, I think that's a big space.
But over-leveraging is outside. I mean, I don't think we should leverage, we should leverage.
It's about controls. As in, nobody thought Lehman would go down. Nobody thought real estate could be over-leveraged. It always goes up in price. So there is never say never. All right, guys. Thoughts, comments, questions?
So how do you see Bharat will play with UPI? Like, is it early right now?
No, it's not early.
So what is the state of UPI? Like, if you could summarize it from what you see it as.
That I'll let Fareed answer.
So it's pretty new, but it's already gaining a lot of traction. A lot of providers, including companies like Freecharge and PhonePe, have included that as a payment method. I think the intent is to allow the customer the choice of payment mode, and the fact that it's got a brilliant set of rails, settles in real time, and has now been packaged pretty reasonably well. I think there's still a lot of opportunity in terms of improving the user experience. Sorry?
So do you have a PSP license? Like, is it a
No, so typically companies like PhonePe and Freecharge would work with a bank because banks have been given a 6-month lead at this point in time to try and create a lot of value around that. That's what Mr. Hota says, and hopefully it's not. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I just want to add, I'm actually the official India Stack UPI guy. So we expect all the banks to come on board by March 2017. So we just got confirmation last week from SBI and HDFC. So they both are going to be on board. In the next phase, we expect at least 14 banks, including Kotak and other major issuers, to come on board. Going forward, you'll see new payments bank also launching their PSPs. Expect Paytm, Reliance Jio, everybody to play on the UPI game. So the goal that we are working on at India Stack is to get 100 million users in the next 1 year. So hopefully more entrepreneurs, more use cases, this will all come in, so more competition. So BBPS is actually live. So there is a way the way you have to get, so it's a licensed model. Unlike UPI, you have to get a RBI license. So it's actually public. So people like Paytm and others are already working on the system. On the acquirer side, which is basically more and more people coming onto the network, that NPCI and its BD team is working aggressively on. So you can expect almost every biller in India, starting from government services to private services, to be locked in on one side. You have banks already connected because NPCI is going to be running the switch. And then this switch is going to be exposed to the license holder, which is like a Paytm. So you have banks, you have billers, everybody connected. So expect more competition even in that space to come.
So my quick view is that I think this piece of getting all the billers on board, and like BillDesk had done a brilliant job of it, and in some sense their entire business goes away if BBPS actually becomes a reality. There've been talks of working together because this is hard work. As an integrating with the number of billers that you're talking about, each each Airtel circle is a different biller, and so on. So the size is massive, and that's hard work. So that I'm hoping can get cracked. If that doesn't get cracked, it might actually be a very, very slow journey, because it's not in the interest of the people who've solved that already. So it's unless they actually help in making this happen much faster, it could go slow. But I would imagine that putting enough BD and marketing push behind it, it should actually happen. So, but there is a risk associated because this is hard.
Right. And even on UPI, I think driving registrations is something, if handles were available to the free charges of the world, I think you would get to 100 million in 3 months.
Okay,
Thanks.
guys, quickly, I have to run. Thank you. You guys should carry on the conversation.